Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our presentation. I'm getting the heads up from our studio manager here at our makeshift studio to get started. So we will get started right now. So thank you for joining us. Welcome to our webinar today, How to Build a Culture Primed for Innovation. My name's Andrew Noble. I'm one of the account executives here at Plum. Before we go too far into the content, I know there's a lot of excitement around this topic. Just a few housekeeping notes. First, a recorded version of this webinar will be made available after the session. You'll see that in a follow-up email. We'd love to hear from you, and this is throughout the session, but also in a brief survey that we'll be sending after. You'll see that there's an opportunity to ask questions in the chat box with the GoToWebinar control panel. So you'll see that on the right side of the screen, and we'll be interacting throughout this presentation as well. Thirdly, if there's any issues at all, or you just need some more information, or there's a technical problem, send me an email, Andrew@Plum.io, and I'll be able to follow up on your request. Now here at Plum, we use analytics and science to humanize the hiring process. We're bringing an innovative approach to culture, talent, and hiring, and what we're all about is really supporting businesses and seeing them succeed. Human resources is one main aspect of that, as we know people are so important. And so what we do is we have multiple different assessments. We've actually assessed over 150,000 applicants, have gone through our assessments. And clients tell us that they would hire 93% of their Plum recommended candidates again. What we're doing is bringing certainty to various processes and human resources that have traditionally been uncertain processes. So today, I'd like to introduce our jam session. This is the first of a series of jam sessions that we'll be running here at Plum. And today I'm joined by two experts to get us into this content on building a culture primed for innovation. Nancy Buck, I'm excited for her to join us. She's the founder and president of Talent Outfitters. That's a human resources consulting firm that specializes in designing and implementing practical human capital solutions that drive business results. Also, I know you wear many hats, Nancy. You're also the VP of People and Talent, or People and Culture at Communitech. And in that role, you're not just working with small startups, you're also working with large-scale organizations and really helping them succeed in your role there. Leann Schneider, thank you as well for joining us. You're one of the organizational development researchers here at Plum. I know you got your PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. And I know your published research on personality assessment, interview anxiety, and impression management will be of benefit to us here today. I know you've also worked with leaders in past roles as a leadership development consultant and coach, and so all of your knowledge today, especially from the research side, I think we're all going to be able to learn from. Why don't I pass it over to you, Leann, and you can outline for us what we'll be learning today.
Thanks, Andrew. So our aim for the webinar is for all of you attendees to walk away with a few things. First, we want you to walk away with an understanding of why a healthy culture is more than just a nice to have. It's actually imperative to driving the business outcomes that you want in your organization. Second, we want you to feel equipped with some strategies to grow a culture of innovation again in your organization. And finally, we want you to be knowledgeable of the specific behaviors and personality traits that are identifiers of the top innovative talent that will help grow that innovation in your organization. So let's get into it then. I know you're attending this webinar because you care about innovation, and Nancy and I would both agree that corporate culture is above all the most important factor in driving innovation. So before we get into how culture and innovation intersect, I think it's important to provide a definition of culture that Plum uses generally. And that is the sum of the everyday experiences, behaviors, interactions, values, and attitudes of your organization. So let's unpack that a little more because that's sounding a little academic. I'm going to start actually with what culture is not. So it isn't the surface level stuff, maybe what's written on the wall or the perks that you provide, like if people can use flexible work schedules or work from home when they want to. Or it's not having a beer fridge or if there's a foosball table out. It's more than just that. It's actually getting deeper. It's what people actually do, how people act in their everyday. Are they actually supporting each other? Are they actually brainstorming innovative ideas? Are they actually engaging in the behaviors that you think your culture is. And finally, it's those personal experiences that people are having. When you look around, what are people doing? That is company culture.
Thanks, Leanne. Nancy, how would you add to this in terms of what you've seen with organizations you've worked with?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I agree with all the things that Leanne said. I always think about how a new employee learns culture. And when I think about that, I think about a model I use when a new employee comes in. So a new employee comes into an organization, they look around and they listen. They know what people are talking about, and frankly, they know what not to talk about. And it may be a conversation where we say, oh no, Andrew, we don't talk about that around here. But they're also observing all those things that Leanne talked about. The statements on the wall are important, material symbols like how big office sizes are, or who gets to sit by the window. But what they're doing with those things they're observing is they're looking for alignment. And frankly, they're looking for misalignment. So from all those things that are happening in an organization, employees are making assumptions and they're forming expectations about what that means. So let's talk about the foosball table. If we have one in the office, but no one thinks they can use it without being judged for not working, that's misalignment. If there are things on a website that talk about diversity, but when I look around the organization, there really isn't much, then that really is a statement of misalignment. And another example that is often talked about is around work-life balance. So lots of organizations talk about work-life balance, but frankly, I don't feel very comfortable leaving the building at 3 o'clock, even though my daughter has a really important dance recital. So again, employees are looking for things, they're observing everything that's going on in the organization, and they're making those assumptions. And so the question really is, are you aligned or misaligned, and what assumptions do you want your employees to make, and frankly, what are they potentially making that you don't want them to? So think about things being aligned. I suggest that we want to help create the organization that we need. So think and examine all those things that are happening and really ask yourself, do we have alignment to really where we're trying to go?
Thanks, Nancy. It is really helpful to think about alignment in the context of reality versus the theoretical in terms of culture. And today we're talking about that culture of innovation. So Leanne, can you help us understand this innovation component to our conversation today?
Sure. So I'll give again the more scientific definition of innovation that we use here at Plum. So that is the ability to generate novel solutions and creative ideas to solve problems. And again, let's unpack that a little more. So to me, innovation is not copying what Google does, and I'm using that as an example, but it's not just reading in a book, seeing an idea that another company that is known for being innovative is doing, and then just using it. It's not implementing, basically not implementing the ideas that have happened. So let's say your organization comes up with some great ideas, but then there's no actual implementation. That to me is not innovation. And then finally, it's not innovation theater. So let's say you have a committee that is organized to come up with innovative ideas, but again, nothing actually gets innovated from it. That to me is not innovation. So to sum that up, to me, innovation is generating those ideas, planning what to do with it, but then actually implementing it.
Yeah, I think innovation, the word actually may be being overused. Innovation to me is a business strategy. It's not an outcome in itself. I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, why are we even talking about innovation? I bet it's to improve business performance. And for some organizations, it's frankly about survival. I work with a lot of startups, and when I talk to corporations, they're actually quite frightened at what the startups are doing. They're
Right.
worried about their own survival. Sometimes it's to increase revenue, very often it is, or market share. Sometimes, frankly, it's to reduce expenses. So think about it as a business strategy, not as an outcome in itself. And I think that's where it really falls apart in organizations. Because a strategy of innovation is really about, as I said before, like culture, examining everything in the organization and changing things to be the most effective and efficient that they can be to achieve our business metrics, whether that be things like revenue or like expense reduction.
Got it. Thanks, Nancy. We want to get the audience involved at this point, so I know we have a lot of attendees now joined us just as we're getting going, and we want your participation. So a question for you. How important is innovation to the future success of your business? What's your opinion on this? And you'll have the opportunity to respond in a poll that will pop up on your screen shortly. So we're really interested in your own opinion here. What's your impression? How important is innovation to the future success of your business? Great. So thank you for your results. We have over 75% of you have already responded. Thank you. So basically, the results are pretty clear in terms of the participants here today. Perhaps a little biased towards innovation in the first place as you're here, but clearly it's very important. And it's important to that business success. That's that connection that we're making here, that innovation, we shouldn't just talk about it in itself, but in alignment or misalignment with business success. Now we have a second question for you. How confident are you that your organization that you're currently working in is set up to innovate? How's that going? You know, in terms of your own confidence. Take an opportunity to respond here. A bit of a gut check for us. And we'll give a little bit more time for people to respond as they're considering their answer. Well, thank you everyone for responding. Again, we have most of the participants here have responded, and there's actually a pretty good diversity in the room. Interestingly, we're seeing that there's definitely less people that picked the 5 out of 5 option. You know, only 17% of people here said they're very confident about their organization's ability. But we do have, you know, over 50% of us, majority of us here in the room, you know, you feel like you are in an organization that's going to be supportive of innovation. However, there is some hesitancy with some of us as well, where more than a quarter of the people here today would be neutral or be against this idea that their organization would be supportive of it. Now, Leanne, I know there's some research around this topic. Can you share that with us?
For sure. So I would say that compared to the study that the Center for Creative Leadership did, where they did an innovation leadership survey in 2015, our group is doing pretty much better. So 94% of the people in the survey that they did found that innovation was a key driver of success. So that's in alignment with our group here. Yet, only 14% were confident in their organization's ability to drive innovation. So I'm happy that the audience is feeling more confident about that, but at least in this Center for Creative Leadership study, they found that they were less confident.
Thanks, Leanne. Now, we've kind of flirted with this idea up to this point, and I really want to jump into it. Culture and innovation, the intersection of the two. Help unpack that, Leanne.
Okay. So the reason that we bring culture and innovation together, I think, is demonstrated by the stat that I'm bringing up here. And that is that, again, the Center for Creative Leadership found that 56% of innovation efforts are unsuccessful because of culture. I know that Nancy would agree with me that having an organizational culture that is aligned for innovation is essential to making that innovation happen.
Got it. So we need to really understand our culture to see innovation take place. But of course, as I'm sure many of us have experienced, there are struggles in that. I know, Nancy, you've seen this in your work. Can you touch on those struggles and some ways of responding?
For sure. And more senior leaders are, they know now that people in culture are really the elements that are getting in their way of driving innovation as a strategy. You know, it's very common that leaders articulate, though, they don't think they have the right people in their organizations to drive their innovation. And yet, interestingly, most employees would say the organization does not set itself up for them to be successful to innovate. So obviously there's a disconnect there, and that's certainly not a recipe for success. In a nutshell, I tend to see misalignment. Regardless of the size of the organization, it's very common to see differences between the articulated strategy of the business strategy that the organization is talking about, how they assemble to get the work done, and the people elements, and that's people practices, how people need to behave, anything to do with people that really need to be successful. And so over the last number of years, I've used a model that I'd actually like to share today. And it's a model of alignment and a model of accountability that drives business outcomes. And I'm hoping that our listeners today can actually utilize this model and take it away to do some assessment of their own organization to see whether it is in fact primed for innovation. So the model is all about alignment, as I said. You can see from this Jenga model, and if you've played Jenga, if you remove the wrong piece, the structure in fact will fall apart. So let's take a look at the model in a little bit more detail. So first of all, I know most of you have done a really great job, and your organizations have done a really great job of understanding the marketplace. And you understand who your consumers are, you understand their behaviors, you understand your competition, your stakeholders, and market trend and consumer trends. All those things are really important. From there, organizations develop strategies and goals. It's really about the direction of the organization. And here's where I say innovation is a strategy. And it's a strategy that gets at some of the stuff that's happening in the marketplace. So if I develop the strategy of innovation under direction, I also then need to make sure that I am articulating the right vision to employees, that I have stated values and actual values, meaning people are actually doing these things, values of the organization that are going to get me to achieve that goal or strategy, and I have the metrics to be able to measure them.
Now, that brings up something that we actually just had a question come in as you were introducing this idea of revenue generation and the need to innovate.
Yeah.
You know, can you with this model, I think there's a way to speak to those two things, generating revenue and innovation.
Absolutely. So if you look at the marketplace, the reason organizations want to drive revenue is that they need to grow. They need to be sustainable. And it may be that there's a competitor, you know, biting on their heels in order to get ahead. So boy, I have to do something different. And that's why I talk about innovation later as change. I have to do something different if I want to. So innovation is a way to do things differently, of course, in order to fight that competitive threat that I have looming at my heels.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think this is a good, regardless of the size of your organization, this is a good breakdown or model to help us see innovation in the context of driving business outcomes.
For sure.
So summarizing what we've just discussed up to this point, culture is about everyday experiences. So it's not just the things you put on the wall, it's about what's really happening, the real assumptions that people are having about the alignment and misalignment, and not just on a superficial level, like really getting down to what's going on in an organization. Thirdly, that misalignment between the stated and the real, you know, there's one thing on the wall, there's something else in actuality. And fourth, innovation is a strategy. It's something that isn't an end in itself, but it's something that can lead us as change into something else. So let's move forward here. And there's another question that I'd like to pose to our experts. So how do you create a culture that supports innovation?
I'll jump in here, Andrew. So for me, one of the fundamental first steps that needs to be done to create a culture of innovation is to actually measure what your culture is. And I know that as an organizational researcher, I tend to be more interested and excited about surveys than most people, but bear with me because I think it actually is helpful and important. So, and I'll give an example to show why that's the case. So recently, we just worked with a multinational car manufacturer at Plum where we surveyed their employees to first get a sense of what their current culture was in a number of areas, including innovation or creativity and experimentation. And then we also surveyed them to get an idea of where they wanted the culture to be. And in this sense, we were able to look at the gap between where they were and where they wanted to be. So in this situation, we knew from previous conversations with senior leaders that the senior leaders really wanted that culture of innovation. They wanted to foster that creativity and experimentation, but they knew they weren't there yet. So as you can see here in the graph, we weren't too surprised when we saw that big red line at the top with creativity and experimentation that the executives really wanted to see more creativity and experimentation than there was. What was surprising to them is that the employees at the management level and at the individual contributor level also wanted that culture of innovation. They also wanted that creativity. There was already that buy-in, and they weren't aware of that. So we were able to facilitate that conversation and that shared awareness, and then able to move on to say, okay, now that we know everyone's on board with innovation, what are we actually going to do about it? And that's actually where I'll share my next recommendation. So this was a recommendation that came out in that conversation that really seemed to resonate with this group. And that was a process that Amazon actually implemented to increase innovation. And that was, instead of asking why when a proposal is brought up, to ask why not. And I'll give an example to illustrate that. Let's say you're on a product team and you go to the product manager and say, I want to implement this new feature set on the product that we have. Typically, the normal response is for the product manager to say, well, why do we need to do that? And then you need to go through a list of rationale reasons about why you should include this feature. But instead, now the question is, well, why shouldn't we do that? And by flipping the script, it's more, well, instead of having to come up with a number of ways of why you need to implement it, now you're coming up with ways why you shouldn't have to implement it. And when you realize that there aren't too many reasons for why you shouldn't do it, then you're more likely to experiment. And that really seemed to work for Amazon, and that really resonated with the organization we worked with.
Great, thanks, Leanne. So those are two good takeaways that we've already just done here. One, measuring the culture and seeing the alignment around the topic of innovation across the organization, not just a senior leadership team meeting or one small focus group. And also, secondly, we're talking here about this approach to innovation, about why not, as opposed to the go-to option being, oh, you want to do something different? The answer is no, unless you can provide a lengthy description of why.
Exactly.
I'd like to bring this back to the model that Nancy brought earlier for driving business outcomes. So let's say I'm a business, and I got the market figured out. I realized my competitors, I realized the landscape, and then I've started to articulate a strategy of here's how I'm going to move forward. And maybe that exists in various goals and tactics moving forward. Does that mean that I should also be changing the structure now, and perhaps a flat organization, Nancy? Should it be, get rid of managers? There's a lot of talk about that. What does this look like on this work side of things?
Yeah, I don't know whether I want to talk about flat organizations, but I will. Your questions are bang on though, Andrew, and I just want to first comment on some of the things Leanne talked about. I love the example of the measurement of culture, because often we should, and when we have a strategy, we should know where we are and we should know where we're trying to get to. And often we talk about innovation, but we really haven't assessed where we are today, and we haven't really articulated where is it we want to go. And without that gap analysis, it's really hard to really know what your work is. So let's assume that that's done, that you have talked about, and it might be a revenue target I want to get to. Remember, innovation is about change. So what is that change today? Where am I trying to go? And when you talk about work, yes, you need to look at structure. So every time you change a strategy, you need to look at see whether your structure is actually helping you or getting in your way. And so if we think that we can use our existing organizational structures, but keep changing the strategies and keep changing the way we need to do things, then I think we're doing ourselves a real disservice. And to me, that is a major misalignment if you think about this model. So if the work in innovation to get done is moving from this place where I am today to where do I want to be, I want to examine my structure. I will comment quickly about flat structures. I think the premise of flat leadership and flat hierarchical structures became vogue when there weren't great models of leadership. And it seemed natural that organizations would fare way better without poor leadership. And that might have been true. But as organizations scale, and I see this a lot in scaling organizations, my recommendations are always to just build great leadership, because leaders are so critical for things like ensuring there's clear accountability and for making things happen well in an organization. So don't become innovative with your management theories and structures. In fact, the old management theories actually worked. It's just that a lot of people didn't follow them. So I think a lot of those theories about how to build great leaders really apply. I'll share a quick model with you. Communitech's model around leadership really focuses on 4 core things, and whether you can call them traits or skills or pieces of work. But you can see that they have very strong people elements. First is courage, and that's really about feeling comfortable and having confidence and making tough calls when we're trying to help people manage through change. It's really about optimism, which is really creating a passion for where we're going and getting people excited about that. Resilience, because as you're going through this innovation journey, you will hit bumps in the road, and having that resilience to keep on going is really critical. But the empathy piece is really about leading people through that impact of change. And so having leaders that are really focused on helping people grow. We're hiring smart people. Let's make sure we're really taking advantage of having lots of brains in our organization. But to do that, you really have to have great leadership.
Great, thank you, and thanks for answering my potentially provocative question about org charts. So recapping what we've discussed in terms of up to this point, first we started with the what of culture, the what of innovation, and then we've started to move now into the real how-tos. So first, measuring your organizational culture. Second, we talked about this approach of why not. Third, we just were talking about this with Nancy, the elements of work aligned with your goals. Now the expectation of, okay, we're going to get somewhere in the future, we're going to start innovating, and we're going to align our structure around that. Well, let's not just innovate around management structures, let's just put people in the right seats perhaps in order to align ourselves to success. And then that leadership approach, that really having leaders in the organization and building your leadership based on a model or whatever that may be is one of the key outcomes as well. Now I'd like to continue into this focus on the who now. So from the what to the how, now to the who, the people. This is one of those key things that we believe in at Plum, is that people are really what drive your organization. In order to see success, you really need to figure out the people. I know, Nancy, you actually have a good question that you work with organizations to ask. Can you share with us that?
Yeah, for sure. So the question that I ask leadership groups all the time is to really consider and think about their high performers that are on their teams, that they either work with as colleagues or you have on your team. And I'd like you to throw out some words about how you would describe them. So if you said, Bob is my top performer, or Susie is my top performer, what does it actually look like? What does Bob or Susie do that more so than other people do that makes you describe them as high performers?
So everyone here today, feel free in that chat window within the GoToWebinar panel, start typing in some of those words that describe those high performers on your team. What are some words? It can be a one-word answer, it can be a few words. So I see some coming in now. So positive, determined, someone who solicits feedback, execution or execution-oriented, someone who's driven. This is great. Oh, we got lots flowing in now. I can't keep up with all of them, but good attitude, kind, collaborative, confident as well. Nancy, is this normally kind of some of the things that you get?
Absolutely, and I'll add some others that I often hear: trustworthy, takes initiative, optimistic, collaboration, people who have integrity, and so those are all great words. And then I often ask a second question to describe your low performers, and not surprisingly, they say all the opposites of those words, right? So they lack all those things, or they're negative, or they have no confidence, and so on. So what's interesting from that exercise, I think, is really the follow-up. And that's when I ask them, so what do you typically hire people for? And they pause and they say, skills and knowledge. And then I'll ask them, so what do you typically fire people for? And they say, behaviors. And then I ask them, so don't you see a problem with that? And so I think this is real opportunity to really rethink how we're hiring people. And if you can see on the screen, this work is really from Barkus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman, and it's a model of skills, knowledge, and talents. And talents, sometimes you call them behaviors or attributes, but they really are what's built in often to a person. So skills are those how-tos, the things that we can learn. And knowledge, of course, my son reminds me that anything he needs to know, he just goes on to Google. Those aren't behaviors, and that's not talents. In this model, they're really about recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior. I'm a very optimistic person, as an example. It would take an awful lot, and I don't even know what you could do to ever make me a pessimist, because that is the filter in which I operate my life. And so we all have those types of behaviors or talents. Customer focus is another one. Being determined to get things done. Being a great listener, or being a collaborative. There's a lot of those things that, in fact, are really hard to teach, and we often have to hire for them. So then I go on to ask the groups, so what do you typically see on a resume? And people respond, well, skills and knowledge. And I challenge them, because I don't know. I mean, there might be the names of skills and knowledge, but there's no evidence of proficiency of skills and knowledge. All I see is job titles and accountabilities. Sometimes it might say some accomplishments. So rethinking how we select our talent, both internally as we transfer people around, but also in our hiring process, I think are really critical. Because what we're really saying as we drive a culture primed for innovation is, doing things the same way and expecting different results is actually pretty futile. What I think we need to do is do things differently, because I hear this group saying, we're looking for different results than what we're getting.
Great. So, those answers that came in, they were talents that people were describing, and that's really what we should be hiring for, but often that's not. And so that's where a pre-employment assessment like Plum can jump into things. Leann, I know you've done some research on this topic. Can you share that with us?
Sure, I will. And I think in talking about this research, I'll relate it back to the model that Nancy was talking about. So often when I work with organizations and they say to me, I want to hire innovative people, I want to make sure I'm promoting innovative people, again, they're going back to the talents or the behaviors that they're looking for in these individuals. So to me, when I think of people who are innovative, and I'm sure the audience would agree on this, I would think of people who are really able to solve difficult problems, who would be really good problem solvers. I'm thinking of people who are open to new experiences, who naturally take time to ponder ideas, who are open to experimenting with new ideas and trying things out. And like I said before about the implementation, who are actually industrious enough to make it work, who will work hard, who will actually follow through and implement all those innovations that are coming out. So to me, that's what I think of when I think of this model. And in contrast, things that you normally see on a resume, like Nancy said, things like education, experience, job titles, that doesn't actually tell us if someone's going to be innovative. That just tells us what their role is previously, and unfortunately, those types of things actually don't predict success on the role generally, and won't predict success in an innovative role specifically too. So when I think about that, and when people ask me for recommendations of what to do about this realization, I usually give two recommendations. The first is that using psychometric tests that measure for these innovative behaviors, so you're actually selecting or promoting people who have these behaviors naturally within them. And I also give the suggestion of using structured interview questions that will get at those innovative traits. And actually, in the webinar, I've given an example of 2 interview questions related to innovation that the audience can use at any time to work into their interviews if they're looking for people who are innovative. The 2 examples are: give me an example of a time when you worked with others to find a new solution to an old problem, and describe a problem that arose at work that required an atypical solution. So these clearly are getting at those innovative behaviors that you want.
And again here, this isn't a brand new idea in terms of behavioral questions. We're not innovating the wheel here. This is a proven method to pull out the talents of our potential candidates or someone that we're considering within the company to lead an innovative initiative. So let's summarize again, up to this point, some of these things that we've learned around the topic of people. We should assess for behaviors, not just skills and knowledge. We need to look holistically at the person and really tap into those things that are going to drive to success, just like Leann noted with that research that shows that behaviors are really going to indicate that. And then structured interviews are a very effective way of diving into those behaviors. And so that's something that you can leverage as well. Now, let's take a second here. We're at this point, we're like feeling good perhaps, and then let's hit it. Let's face it, reality sets in, and not everybody in our organization is excited about innovation. In fact, some people, they have that resistance to change. Nancy, I know that perhaps people in this room, they're the innovators in their companies, and they're trying to bring this into their reality. But there's going to be that resistance to change. How should they handle that? What are some things that they should be thinking through?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that this is really where the rubber hits the road. And I saw some questions come in, and there's a couple that I just want to hit on, I think, here as I talk about resistance to change. The question was, what percentage of time should people spend on innovation? And then there's always a challenge about, but I don't have any extra money, so how do I spend money on innovation? And I want to challenge actually those questions, because what I'm really saying is innovation is not an event, and it's not a process. It really is about every day. It's about culture, which is really about everything being thinking about everything as being innovation. And so the answer is 100%, meaning when the person steps in the office, they should be thinking about, am I doing this process the best way I can to help the company drive revenue or reduce costs or whatever, or create market share, whatever those business outcomes are. Is this a process that I don't have any clue why I'm even doing this process, because I don't even think it adds value? Do I feel safety to say that to my manager? So it doesn't have to take extra money, and it's not about time. It's about everything. It's about a way of operating, which is really what culture is. And so if you buy into that, and you believe that culture really is about change, because that's change, right? Mm-hmm. That is, man, I used to have a job and I thought you told me what to do and I'm just doing it. Even though the processes, I thought they were crazy forever. And the leaders aren't asking questions like, hey, what's the one thing that drives you crazy about your job? Okay, if we could fix one thing for you, what would make your life a whole lot easier? Those are the kinds of questions. So another question came in about developing leaders. Leaders who ask great questions like that, because leaders' job is to remove barriers, those are going to be great leaders. Leaders play such a critical role in driving an innovation culture. And the role of leader really is to drive, lead, and support employees through change. So when you talk about resistance, I think it can be about massive organizational transformation. I don't want to scare people, but this is big. And I would suggest that leaders need to create organizations of trust, safe places where diversity of thought actually can occur. Diversity is not about people looking different around the table. It's about people who come from different backgrounds and experiences and who feel safe giving different ideas. Otherwise, you might as well have everybody look the same with the same experiences, because you only need one person to speak. Diversity is about different opinions to challenge each other. So because of that, you leaders need to be facilitators of ideas. How can it look like you're creating a safe environment for diversity of thought, not that it looks like conflict? So how can leaders help work with different ideas? You need leaders who can be trusted advisors to give employees feedback on their performance, because all our employees, they all want to grow and develop. You need great coaches and mentors. They all are looking for career champions. And you need leaders who are caring and they can be trusted partners. Because in particular, leaders have to help understand that people experience loss when they experience change. And I want to take a quick detour to really talk about that. I think employee resistance, which often can look like pretty terrible behavior sometimes if it gets too severe, I think it's often about loss. And so what might look like resistance, I believe, is loss. And it's often because the employee is in fact grieving, and they're grieving loss. Some of those losses can be things like loss of competence. I used to know my job. I knew that system, and now you're telling me I have to learn another one. I'm not an expert anymore. People don't see me as the person to go to. That's a loss for me. It's a personal loss. It can be loss of relationships. It can be loss of a career path. I thought I had a career path in that job. You just changed my world on me. I don't know what my new career path is. And so where I might look like I'm resisting it because I'm not confident and I'm anxious, I'm actually grieving. So leaders talking about those things, articulating that this is going to be hard. You are going to feel loss. You're going to grieve the past. I need to help you get through that. I'm going to support you. And I'm going to show you the path forward, and I'm going to show you why it's so important that you come, because we want you to be part of this great organization we're going to build. So that kind of involvement is really important. And when I talk to leaders about that, there's almost an aha moment that, oh, I just thought they were being, pissy today, or it's been a really bad week, and they complain about everything in the coffee station just because they have a bad attitude. You're right. I just changed their world, and they're probably grieving. And so I'm going to give them more information. I'm going to acknowledge that it's going to take them a while. Don't take long. I take days because we got work to do. But let me help them move on. Let me be a coach and help them move through change.
I love the honesty of that. It's not ignoring what's going to happen, but it's not just being blunt. It's being compassionate. And so I really think that's something that whatever your role in an organization, you can take that approach to change initiatives. So we have some time for questions now. We're going to be able to wrap up some of the different things that we've discussed after the Q&A, but we really want to continue interacting with some of the things that you've shared with us. So there's a number of different questions. Hopefully we'll get to most of them today. Lauren asks, oh, sorry, we already answered that question earlier. Tim asks, what percentage of employee time should be devoted to innovation? Oh, we already answered that. I think Nancy.
100% plus, yes.
Sorry about that. I have a different question here. In the case of a small startup, there is an obvious need to bring in income and a lack of available resources. How can a company with limited resources devote the necessary time and capital to developing leaders, high performers who foster innovation? Do you want to just recap what you answered in terms of that question?
Sure. Yeah, because I mean, I'm a heavy believer in developing leaders. So I think the first thing is to really think about who are the people you're putting in leadership roles. Leadership roles are the most critical roles in your organization because leaders attract talent, but they also retain talent. And in the meantime, they create an opportunity for employees to be highly engaged and very productive. So you will impact all of your business outcomes if you don't have the right people in those jobs. So really pay attention to who you're putting in those roles. They should be, as I said, they should be able to build trust. They should actually care about people. They should be good coaches and mentors. And then I would suggest that a lot of leader development really is about encouraging leaders to ask great questions. So questions that solicit information from employees. Because your employees have so much information.
Mm-hmm.
You know, more heads are better than one, right? We've got we hire these really great people. Let's really try and figure out how we can take the great advantage of them. You know, leadership development happens a lot on the job. It happens through modeling. Get them connected to other great leaders, and look for programs out there. They don't have to be expensive, where employees can actually get continued leadership development and really hone their skills. Self-awareness, I would say, is probably number one. Mm-hmm. Who am I as a leader? What am I good at? And having leaders that really are good learners. But again, if you think about the Communitech core model, those leaders that have courage, those leaders that can are optimistic, that really can deal with resilience, but also really care about people. That combination of characteristics, I think, really makes for great leadership.
Great, thanks. Another question here, kind of interesting. How do you know if your organization is innovative enough?
I love that question. Are you getting the business results you're looking for? If the answer is no, you're not innovative enough, because it means you need to change something. Right? And so if your revenues aren't where they want to be, if you don't have the customers you want to have, if you don't have the market share you want to have, then you're not being innovative enough, meaning you're not there yet. And so what do you need to do differently than what you're doing today to get you closer to those business results?
Got it. Makes sense. Scott asked this question. Does everyone in my organization need to be a top performer?
Oh, that's a great question. So my question in response to that would be, what do you mean by a top performer? Because even when I'll take a measurement perspective, often we ask leaders to say, okay, who are your top, who are your middle, who are your bottom performers? Often top performers may be the ones who are generating the most revenue, who are going above and beyond, but in their mind, does bottom performer actually mean the ones who are the workhorses, who are getting the work done? That's important too. It doesn't always need to be the ones who are just engaging in those innovative behaviors. You could think of it in terms of different stages of the life cycle of innovation. You have the people who are coming up with the ideas, you have the people who are implementing the innovative ideas. So I guess I'm just throwing a little bit of a wrench into the idea of high performer in that case.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a slightly different approach from a talent management perspective. When we look and assess groups of people from a talent management perspective, you often have a small group, 10 or 15% of people that you would call your top performers. That would be the language you would tend to use. And it tends to be those people who really are above and beyond. And they learn faster, they assimilate information faster, they're more creative than your core group. And so if that's what we mean by top performer, that's one definition. The other definition, though, is do I need everybody to be really great in their job? And the answer is yes. And so if it's about increased productivity and performance by everybody, if I've got 5 people in a scale-up, boy, I need all 5 of them to be top performers, meaning they need to be really great in their job. If I've got an organization of 5,000 people, I also want everybody to be great in their job. And that really speaks to job match to some degree, right? I want people in those jobs who love the work they do. I love the work I do. But if you put me in a finance job, I wouldn't love that work. I could learn it, but it's really not where my strengths lie or where my interests and desires lie. So if you can get people matched to the jobs that they loved, the work they love to do, and put them under great leadership, you've got a real recipe for success. On the flip side, and I want to talk very briefly about bottom performers. Leadership also, I believe, play a key role in driving performance. It's leaders' job to make employees successful, meaning they need to build performance and they need to build confidence. Because the more confident I am, the likely I'm going to continue to get better at what I'm doing. If you have performance issues or employees that are problems, I would suggest you ask yourself a couple of questions. The number one being, what are you doing as a leader to contribute to that non-performance? In most cases, when I examine those kinds of situations, I find that there is something missing from the leader. Sometimes it's not enough direction. The employee wasn't clear on accountabilities. They weren't really sure that was what they weren't doing was as high a priority as I thought it should be. But really examine that, because it's your job as a leader to make your people successful. And you need, if you end up needing to move someone out of the organization, you really need to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, I have done everything in my role as coach and mentor to make this person successful. Unfortunately, they can't be successful here. I want to help them be successful somewhere else. And that's really putting your career coach hat on as well.
Great, thank you. Sheila asked this question. I guess those with the most resistance to innovation and development of the organization should be terminated, as they are bringing management trust to bad morale.
Wow, interesting question, because there's a whole bunch of things to dissect in that. So again, I would dissect resistance. Why is it the person seems to be resistant? And have you had the conversation? So, you look at somebody and say, Andy, it appears that you're not happy. It looks like you are resisting what we're trying to do here. Talk to me about that. What's going on for you? Right? Really trying to find out whether it's a performance issue. What can I do? Are there tools I can give you? And so what you're trying to do, again, is increase both their confidence as well as their performance. So dig into that first. If they say, A, I don't want to do it, so I have no desire to do what you're asking me to do, and frankly, wouldn't be very good at it anyway, then you might have an absolute mismatch, in which case, can you put that person in a better fit job in the organization? It should always be your last course to terminate somebody. So really dig into what's going on there. And then, as I said, ask yourself as a leader, what am I potentially doing to create the resistance and or the bad morale?
Great, thank you. Another question here from Meredith. Do you know of any tools that exist to help people come up with innovative or new ideas? So thinking about tools to help us, think of those new and different ideas.
My simple recommendation would be if you bring people in a room and if you ask them a question and if you facilitate that discussion, often the ideas will just come. I personally don't think you need to have some sort of complicated recipe for doing it. Often if you just act as that facilitator, and I know Nancy mentioned before, as a leader, acting as that person that's asking those questions, the ideas will just come naturally. But that's just my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the simplest approach. And to say, so if we were going to do this, what would we have to do to actually say yes to this or to really make this work? So let's not start from all the reasons why this won't work. Let's assume this is going to work. What are we going to have to do to get there? And so just reframing the way you think about things. And then there's other things like, Communitech runs boot camps and, design thinking workshops. So there actually are organizations that can scale you up in ways to think differently. Or asking your customers. That's another good one, is really get out and asking your customers about what you're doing and what you could do to make their lives easier. So there, you can go from a simple approach into how you frame questions to more complicated or more sophisticated different tools. Just, often depends on how much money you have in your organization, how much you want to spend on those kinds of things. There are some pretty cheap, high-value things you can do, as Leann said, from a facilitation perspective.
Great, thanks. Another question here, why does my company need to change culture if everyone's happy? How do I measure that approach to things?
You can have a really happy culture and have really sucky business results. So, right? I mean, and literally, I've seen an organization, and if you did an employee engagement survey, the scores literally were 100. It was an organization that the organization I was in acquired. The business was going down the toilet, but people were happy. So there was this great work-life balance, and people really liked each other, but people weren't being held accountable, and nobody was driving business results. So in the long run, a company going down the toilet is not healthy for employees, and you're not very happy when you lose your job, right? And so really getting focused on how do I get people engaged in moving things forward and driving business outcomes and giving them the context. I believe there's some fundamental beliefs, and it's part of the community tech leadership model. One is that people can be trusted. The second is that people can learn and change and grow. The third and fourth are that people really want to contribute and they want to be part of something important. So describe where you're trying to go and get them involved in it. That's how people grow. And I think you can be happy and profitable at the same time, because that's really your outcome, is how do you get people to be happy in an organization that's really growing? Because in the end, if I don't have a profitable company, my people aren't going to be very happy.
Got it.
For very long.
And the second half of that question was about that measurement of that culture. Leann, do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So obviously I'm biased because I come from a Plum perspective, but you can measure different dimensions of culture that you may be interested in. So you can measure whether or not the company thinks that they're innovative or if they want to be innovative. Kind of like the example that I brought up before, where the company was and where the company wants to be with culture. And you can measure different dimensions like that. The happiness question kind of speaks more to engagement, which to me would be a completely separate thing that you're measuring. Their job satisfaction, how engaged they are in their job, their net promoter score. To me, those are two separate but related things that you can measure with organizational surveys and really dive deep into to see how engagement and organizational culture are related. That's something that I know I really enjoy doing.
Cool. Thanks, Leann.
Andrew, can I take a shot at that? Because I think there's a process that every leader, no matter where they are in the hierarchy of leadership in the organization, can play a part in. And that's stopping every once in a while, whether it's a team meeting once a month, and saying, what's helping us meet our objectives? And just get your group engaged in that conversation. And the second question is, what's getting in our way? And it allows the team then to say, well, you know what, we've been doing this forever, and it frankly is getting in our way. I coached a scale-up company this morning, and small organization wanting to grow, and I asked them to do that reflection, and it's easy to do, and you can get some really meaningful dialogue from your people, and it creates a culture of innovation because it says to employees, it's okay to say what's working and frankly what's not working, and then we actually do something about it and we change it. And then we ask it another month, anything else getting in the way? What's now helping us? And then as we grow as an organization, we stop and say, are those things that were helping us before, when are those going to get in our way? But guaranteed the things that are getting in your way now will continue to get in your way if you don't fix them. So be very open to feedback from your employees about what's getting in your way. And you can probably do this exercise yourself to look at your own department and say, here are the things I think are really helping us and helping us get to our objectives. And here's some things that frankly we better change because they just are getting in our way.
Great. So we have one last question now from Lauren before we wrap up, and this one will actually lead into our conclusion actually nicely. So if there is one clear role or department that's seen as the source for innovation, how do you present the notion that it's cultural and that everyone is involved? So, you're in this situation where there's a department that's more innovative, but then, you're trying to make it more of a cultural thing across the organization.
Sure. I would suggest each department head thinks about where they're trying to go. So here I am today, and here's where I'm trying to go. And then what does innovation look for me? What does change look like for me? So in the product team, it probably means coming up with new innovative products that consumers love. But in an operational department, it probably means reducing expenses so that I have more margins, right? And reducing processes, potentially for leaders to figure out how to take 10% of the headcount out of the organization and put them into another part of the organization. So what are your business outcomes and what do you need to do? Because creating change towards an innovation business strategy should really involve every single person in the organization. HR departments should be trying to do better recruiting. They should be doing better development of people, higher engagement, being catalysts. Finance departments should be trying to figure out how to do month-end quicker. You know, it's now down to 2 days and it used to be 5 days. So all the processes that exist in organizations. You know, a simple one is, how long does it take to order business cards in a large corporation? It shouldn't take 3 months. I should be able to get them in a week. What's all that about?
Thanks. I'm pointing the finger at someone in the room right now who still is working on business cards. But so what we'll do now is we'll wrap up and recap some of the things that we've discussed today. So one of those key things was examine your culture for alignment. So thinking about alignment in terms of business outcomes was, I think, a big breakthrough for a lot of us today. But then seeing that alignment, and if that alignment exists or misalignment exists. Talking about measuring culture, of course, we were talking about that a little bit from the Plum perspective as well, as we take part in culture analysis with companies. Thirdly, asking why not. So not just having a negative approach to new ideas, but really leading with optimism. And that's something that the leadership team, as the next point highlights, can really take charge of. So focusing on the leadership approaches, we talked about that core model that Nancy shared with us. We also have find people with innovative behaviors. So not just thinking about what's on a resume. Oh, I have the title of innovator on my resume. Okay, great, but what about the behaviors? What about the talents? What about the things that we see in our top performers? And lastly, treat innovation as change management. It's really not just about an end in itself, but bringing us towards that change. So I think there was a lot to take away, a lot to implement. What we'll be doing after this presentation is actually sharing with you a recap of this video and more information about next webinars and things that you can get involved in. I just thank everyone for their time today. We at Plum, as been mentioned, we really do prioritize people. We know that that's what's going to lead to those business outcomes. As your culture is aligned, your people are aligned with where you want to be. And so sometimes it's about getting the right people in the right seats, finding that match to the roles. And that's what Plum can do with our match criteria survey, with our hiring tool, and even assessing that culture. We can help you with that as well. So feel free to reach out to us and we can get in touch with you as well in terms of helping you grow your organization. This isn't just about your HR department. This is about everything, as Nancy said earlier. So thank you for jamming with us today. Perhaps you'll have some peanut butter and have a great sandwich after this. Everybody is shaking their head at me right now, but thank you for your time and have a good one, guys. Take care. Bye.